The first time I saw the face pressed up against the middle window on the second floor and glaring at me, I thought someone had broken into the old house across the street. That was the reasonable explanation. We've all heard horror stories about squatters. Once they move in, you can never get rid of them. The house had been empty since before I moved into my apartment. 3 years ago, closer to 4 now. Long enough that it had stopped looking like a house and started looking like something the street had grown around. The kind of property people stopped mentioning after a while because everyone already knew the story. There had been a fire. I knew that much because I've worked fire restorations before. As a contractor, I've spent most of my adult life walking through ruined buildings with a flashlight in one hand and a clipboard in the other, writing down what could be saved and what had to be torn out. Smoke damage, water damage, electrical burns, collapsed framing, warped joists. I knew what fire did to a structure. I knew what people did after fire too. Some homes could be saved if the fire damage was small, contained to 1 or 2 rooms. People would cry when they saw their new kitchen or living room restored. But for extensive damage, oftentimes people just boarded things up and walked away. Sometimes because of insurance, sometimes because of lawsuits, sometimes because the grief was too much and the money wasn't enough. The house across the street had that look. A wide old colonial with blackened siding and plywood nailed across most of the lower windows. There was a chain across the front gate, padlocks on both doors, and metal security panels screwed over the basement windows. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make sure nobody wandered inside. At the time, that made sense to me. Condemned properties attract kids, addicts, scrappers, bored men with bolt cutters, people looking for copper pipes, or a dry place to sleep. I had seen enough of that to understand why an owner would seal up a burned-out house and leave it to rot. Still, I hated looking at it. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building directly across from it. My bedroom window faced the house. So did my kitchen window. Every night, whether I wanted to or not, I saw it sitting there behind the street lights. Darker than the houses around it, its upper windows intact but dead. Most of the time I kept the blinds half closed. That night I hadn't. I was standing in my kitchen around 1 in the morning drinking water because I couldn't sleep. It had been raining earlier and the street still shone under the lamps. Everything looked slick and flat and empty. Then I saw someone in the upstairs window, not moving behind it, not passing by, pressed against it. Face flat to the glass. Both hands spread on either side. For a few seconds, I didn't react at all. My brain tried to make the shape into something else. A reflection, a stain. Plastic sheeting inside the house, catching light from the street. Then the face shifted just enough for me to see the pale oval of it. The hands did not move. I remember putting the glass down very carefully on the counter. I remember the tiny click it made against the tile. I remember thinking that if I moved too fast, whoever was in that window would know I had seen them, which was stupid because they were already looking right at me. I called the police non-emergency line first. I told them there appeared to be someone inside the condemned house across the street. I said it looked like a squatter. I said the person was upstairs at the window and seemed distressed or unstable. I did not say that their face was pressed so hard against the glass it looked flattened. I did not say that they had not blinked once. 2 officers came by about 40 minutes later. By then the window was empty. I watched from behind my blinds as they shined flashlights along the front of the property. They checked the chain at the gate. One of them walked around to the side path and came back shaking his head. They did not enter. They couldn't. The place was locked down tight. They swung by my apartment before they left to check in with me. One asked if I was sure I hadn't seen my own reflection. I told them I was sure. They said the property was secure. That was the word they used. Secure. No signs of entry, no broken boards, no fresh damage, no open windows, no way in that they could see. I wanted to argue, but standing there in my apartment doorway in sweatpants and a t-shirt, I suddenly felt foolish, like the kind of tired man who sees things in abandoned windows because he lives alone and sleeps badly. So I thanked them. I shut the door, and before I went back to bed, I looked once more across the street. The upstairs window was empty. I slept with the blinds closed. The second time I saw it was 3 nights later. I was getting home late from a job, a small kitchen fire. Nothing dramatic, but enough smoke damage that the family had been standing outside in slippers while my crew hauled air scrubbers through their hallway. I was exhausted. My clothes still smelled faintly of wet ash and melted plastic. When I stepped out of my truck and looked up at my building, something made me turn. The face was back. Same window, the top middle one. Same position. Face pressed to the glass. Hands spread flat. This time I was outside when I saw it. There was no apartment window between us. No reflection to blame. The street was quiet. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the air was still damp. The abandoned house sat behind its gate like a sealed box. And up there in the second-floor window, that pale face stared down at me. I stood beside my truck with my keys in my hand and tried to make myself see a person hiding in the house, a person who needed help, a person who had broken in somehow and was now trying to scare me or warn me or get my attention. But the longer I looked, the harder that became. Because people shift their weight. People blink. People turn away when they're caught watching. This thing did none of that. I called again. This time I used 911. I said there was someone inside a burned-out, condemned house. I said I had reported it before. I said the person appeared to be trapped or unstable. I said their face was pressed against the upstairs window. By the time the cruiser arrived, the window was empty. Again. The officers were polite, but I could feel the change in them as soon as they saw me. Recognition. Not of me personally, but of the situation. Same address, same caller, same empty window. They checked the exterior again. They checked the side path. One officer walked all the way around the back, while the other stood by the gate and shone his flashlight up at the window. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no movement, no person. They told me they would make a note and try to contact the property owner. I asked if they could go inside. They said, not without permission or probable cause. A report of a possible trespasser wasn't enough if there were no visible signs of entry and no active emergency. I pointed to the window. I told them I'd seen someone there. The officer looked up at it for a long moment. Then he said there was nobody there now. I know that sounds reasonable. I know it does. That's what made it worse. For the next week, I tried not to look. I failed every night. It became a ritual before I wanted it to. Brush my teeth, turn off the kitchen light, stand in the dark behind the blinds, and look across the street. Most nights, nothing. Then, on the 6th night, there it was again. Face to the glass, hands spread. Only this time something was different. The face looked closer. I don't mean the figure had moved closer to the window, it was already pressed against it. I mean the face itself seemed to occupy more of the pane. Bigger somehow. As if whatever was behind the glass had pushed harder, flattening itself more completely into the narrow square of reflected streetlight. I could see the mouth that time. It was closed. No expression, not a grimace, not a smile, just a mouth pressed into a pale line against old glass. I took a picture with my phone. The image came out black, not blurry, not underexposed, black. The house was visible, the window was visible, but inside that one pane where the face had been, there was only a dark square. I took another. Same thing. Then another. On the 3rd photo, the window appeared empty. I looked up from the screen. The face was still there. That was the first time I really felt something in me begin to tighten. I called the police again the next morning instead of that night. I wanted to sound reasonable. I wanted to be the kind of person who documents a problem and follows up. Not the kind who calls emergency services at 2 a.m. over a shadow. The dispatcher transferred me twice before I got someone who knew what I was talking about. They told me the property owners had been contacted. They were out of state, traveling indefinitely. They had no plans to come to the property. They had refused to grant access. I asked what that meant. They told me that unless there was evidence of a break-in, fire, active threat, or someone in immediate danger, there wasn't much more the police could do. I said there was someone in the house. They told me they understood that I believed that. That sentence stayed with me. I understood that you believed that. Not, we believe you. Not, we're looking into it. Just that thin, careful language people use when they've already decided where to file you. I asked what the owners said when they were told there might be a squatter. There was a pause. Then I was told they were aware of the concern and did not wish to authorize entry. Aware of the concern. I remember standing in my kitchen with the phone to my ear, staring at that dead house in broad daylight. The upper window looked ordinary then, dirty, rain-streaked, reflecting a pale sky. The plywood on the lower windows was gray and swollen. The front door had 2 padlocks and a chain looped through an iron handle that looked newer than everything around it. That detail bothered me suddenly. The locks were new. Not brand new, but newer than the fire damage. Newer than the rot. Heavy-duty hardware. The kind you use when you're serious about keeping a place sealed. I had worked enough sites to know the difference between keeping teenagers out and nobody opens this. Over the next few nights, I started noticing things I should have noticed earlier. The basement windows weren't just boarded. They had metal plates screwed over the plywood. The back gate had 2 locks, not one. The side door was covered by a sheet of steel, bolted into the frame from the outside. The house hadn't just been abandoned. It had been shut. The face appeared 4 more times. Always after midnight, always when I was alone. Once I tried leaving my kitchen lights on and sitting at the table with my back to the window. I lasted 20 minutes before the feeling became unbearable. There is a particular kind of fear that comes from refusing to look at something. It doesn't shrink. It grows in the space behind your head. When I finally turned around, the face was there, waiting. I don't know how I knew that. It wasn't doing anything. It hadn't moved. But the sight of it gave me the awful sense that it had been there the entire time, patiently watching the back of my skull. Another night I watched it through binoculars. That was a mistake. From across the street, with the naked eye, the face had enough distance to remain almost human. Pale skin, dark eyes, blurred features distorted by dirty glass. Through the binoculars, I saw too much and not enough. I saw that the fingers were spread too evenly against the pane. I saw that the nails were dark. I saw that the skin around the mouth did not crease against the glass the way skin should. It looked compressed but not flattened, as if the face wasn't soft enough to change shape properly. And I saw the eyes. They were open, wide, dark, and dry. I watched for almost 10 minutes. It never blinked, not once. I stopped sleeping after that. Not completely. Nobody stops completely. You drift. You lose time. You wake up like with your neck bent wrong on the couch and your mouth dry and the room gray with morning. But real sleep, the kind that resets you, disappeared. I started making mistakes at work. Small ones at first. Leaving my tape measure in a wall cavity. Forgetting to photograph a ceiling line. Driving past exits. Then one afternoon I was standing in a burned duplex, staring at a smoke-blackened stairwell, and I realized I had been thinking about the house across the street for 20 minutes, while my crew waited for me to answer a question. A stairwell, half-burned, leading up into darkness. I went home early. That night, the face wasn't in the window. For some reason, that scared me more. I stood at my kitchen window until almost 3 a.m, watching the empty pane. Nothing, no face, no hands, no pale shape. Just that vacant second-floor window, hanging above the boarded lower level. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt observed from somewhere else. The following night, I saw it again. but not right away. At first, the window was empty. I remember letting out a breath and feeling embarrassed by my own disappointment. Then I looked down at my phone for maybe 2 seconds. When I looked back up, the face was there, fully pressed against the glass. No movement, no approach, no transition. Just there, like a frame had been cut from the film. That was when I decided to go inside. I wish I could tell you there was some noble reason, concern for a person in danger, anger at negligent owners, civic responsibility. It was not that clean. I needed to prove something. That there was a squatter. That there wasn't. That I was tired. Not insane. That there was a physical explanation hiding inside that house, and if I could just put my hands on it, if I could stand in that room and look out through that window at my own apartment, then the thing would become ordinary. Dangerous, maybe? Disturbing. But ordinary. I waited 2 nights. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to give myself time to back out. Maybe I wanted to be sure. The face appeared both nights. The next night, while I watched it from my dark kitchen, one of the hands slowly lifted off the glass. Not much. Just enough to leave a pale print behind. Then the hand settled back exactly where it had been. I did not call anyone. The next night, just after 1, I packed my tools. I brought a flashlight, bolt cutters, a pry bar, work gloves, a cordless drill, a multi-tool with a metal cut-and blade, and a respirator because I knew better than to breathe in an old burn site. I wore boots and a heavy jacket. I told myself I was being careful. I told myself a lot of things. The street was empty when I crossed. That was the first thing I remember clearly. No cars passing, no voices, no television flicker in neighboring windows. Just the cold hush after midnight and the dead house waiting behind its gate. Up close, it looked worse. All buildings age differently from a distance. Across the street, the house had seemed abandoned but stable. Standing at the gate, I could see how deeply the fire had marked it. Black stains crawled up the siding under the eaves. The porch roof sagged. The boards over the windows had warped outward at the edges from years of rain. But the locks were clean. That bothered me more than the rot. The chain on the gate was thick, industrial, the kind used on construction sites. Not something an elderly owner throws on after a fire and forgets. The padlock was oiled. No rust in the shackle. Someone maintained it. I almost turned back then. I should have. Instead, I cut the chain. The snap sounded impossibly loud. I stood still afterward, listening. Nothing moved inside the house. The front steps creaked under my weight. The porch smelled like wet wood and old soot. The front door had been reinforced with a steel hasp and 2 locks, but the frame around it was fire-weakened. I could tell where the wood had softened. I could tell where pressure would split it. That was my job. Knowing where broken things would give, it took me longer than I expected. Whoever had sealed that door had not been casual. The screws were long and sunk deep. The metal plate had been added after the fire. I could see clean drill marks cutting through old char. As I worked, I kept glancing at the upstairs window. Empty. The face wasn't there. That should have helped. It didn't. When the door finally gave, it did not swing open. It released. There was a difference. The seal broke with a wet cracking sound, and a breath of air pushed out through the gap. Not wind. Air. Stale, trapped, and cold. It carried the smell of smoke, mold, wet plaster, and something faintly sweet underneath that I recognized from fire sites where organic things had burned, and no one wanted to say it aloud. I put on the respirator. Then I stepped inside. My flashlight cut through dust so thick it looked suspended in water. The entry hall was narrow, the wallpaper blistered and peeling. The floorboards were black near the baseboards, but intact under my boots. Water stains ran down the walls in long brown veins. The silence inside that house was different from the silence outside. Outside there had been the city, far-off traffic, wind, pipes, the electrical hum of my own building behind me. Inside there was nothing. Not even the normal settling noises of an old structure. It felt held. I moved slowly. Contractor brain took over at first. That helped. I noted the soft spots in the floor, the direction of the joists. The worst of the fire damage seemed to have started toward the rear and climbed upward. The ceiling in the hall was cracked, but not fully collapsed. The parlor on the left had been gutted by smoke. The room on the right was worse, its walls stripped down to lath in places, the plaster fallen in heaps. Everything was old, except the reinforcements. That was what I kept finding. A side door sealed from the inside with a horizontal steel bar. Interior basement access covered with plywood and bolted shut. Newer screws, newer brackets, newer hardware laid over burned wood like stitches over a wound. In the rear hall, I found scratches on one of the sealed doors. At first, I thought they were tool marks. Then I got closer. They were on the inside. Long vertical grooves dug into the wood around the seam of the door. Some of them were deep enough to show pale material beneath the char. They started low and dragged upward in clusters, uneven but deliberate, like someone had clawed at the door for a very long time. I stood there with my flashlight on those marks and felt the first true conviction settle into me. The locks were not there to keep people from entering. They had been placed to stop something from leaving. I wanted to go then. I remember that clearly. I wanted to turn around, step back into the street, call the police, and tell them whatever words would make them understand that something was wrong in a way paperwork could not hold. But then I thought of the window. That upstairs window. The face. The hands. I had come this far because I needed to stand in that room. I needed to see what was there. The staircase was near the center of the house. I almost missed it because the lower half was boxed in by temporary bracing. Not original. That was obvious right away. Someone had built a crude frame around the stairwell after the fire, and nailed plywood across part of it, then added more brackets and metal straps over time. I cut through one of the straps with the multi-tool. The sound filled the house, a whining metal scream that seemed too alive in that silence. When it stopped, the quiet rushed back harder than before. I pried loose the plywood. Behind it, the stairs climbed upward into blackness. Only they didn't. Not all the way. At first, I thought my flashlight was catching debris. Then I raised the beam and saw the truth. The staircase ended halfway up. Not at a landing, not at a door. It simply stopped. The upper half had burned away or collapsed, leaving jagged treads and exposed stringers pointing into open space. Above them was nothing. No second-floor hall, no upstairs room, no floor. My mind rejected it so completely that for several seconds, I just stood there waiting for the rest of the house to arrange itself into sense. I moved closer. The flashlight beam climbed past the broken stairs and vanished into a wide, open void where the second floor should have been. Charred beams crossed the space like ribs. Sections of collapsed flooring lay below in black heaps. The ceiling above was open in places, showing dark rafters and patches of roof repair. There was no usable upper floor. There hadn't been for years. I lifted the flashlight toward the front of the house, toward the street, toward the window. It was there. The upstairs window I had watched every night from my apartment. From outside, it looked like any second-floor window. Dirty glass, old frame, a little smoke staining around the edges. From inside, it hung above empty air. There was no floor beneath it, no landing, no platform, no place where a person could stand. I remember whispering no, though I don't know who I was saying it to. I stepped beneath the void and aimed the flashlight straight up at the window. My apartment building was visible through the filthy glass across the street. My own windows were dark squares in the brick facade. My bedroom, my kitchen. I had seen something in this window. I had seen it night after night, face pressed against the glass, hands spread flat, standing there. Except it couldn't have been standing, because there was nowhere to stand. The thought came slowly, and then all at once, it had not been standing, it had been hanging, suspended somehow in that burned-out space, pressed against the inside of the window from above or behind, or from some angle my mind still refuses to picture clearly. The human shape I had imagined, the shoulders and body my brain had supplied in the darkness, had never been there. There had only been the face, the hands, the glass. I backed away without meaning to and nearly fell over a broken beam. That was when my flashlight caught the wall below the window. The blackened plaster there was marked, not with scratches, with prints, handprints, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, layered over one another in soot and ash and something darker, all around the empty wall beneath the window, reaching up from below, pressing outward, dragging down, And in the center of the glass, where the face always appeared, there was a clean oval in the grime. Not clean like someone had wiped it. Clean like something had been pressing there over and over for years. I don't know how long I stared. Long enough for my arm to ache from holding the flashlight. Long enough for a sound to begin behind me. At first I thought it was the house settling. A slow creak. Then another. Not footsteps. Pressure. Like something very old adjusting its weight. Above me, one of the remaining beams flexed with a soft groan. I did not look up. I turned and walked back toward the front door. Not ran. That matters to me for some reason. I walked. Fast, but controlled. Like if I ran, I would admit I knew what was in there with me. Halfway down the hall, I passed the sealed interior door with the scratches. It was open, not wide, just enough. A black vertical gap where there had been none before. I know I had not opened it. I know that. Cold air moved through the hallway from behind me, touching the back of my neck. I kept walking. At the front door, I realized what I had done. The hasp was broken. The frame was splintered. The seal was open. All that careful hardware, all those years of locks and chains and steel plates and owners refusing police access, undone by me in less than an hour because I couldn't stand not knowing. I stepped onto the porch. The night outside felt too open. I crossed the street without looking back. I left the gate open. In my apartment, I locked the door and pushed my couch against it. Then I closed every blind except the one in my kitchen. I don't know why I left that one open. Maybe some part of me needed to confirm the house was still there. Maybe some part of me already knew it wouldn't matter. Across the street, the upstairs window was empty. I stood there until dawn. Nothing appeared. In the morning, I wondered if I should call the police and confess enough to get someone out there. I would say I saw signs of forced entry. I would say I found the door open. I would leave myself out of it as much as possible. I did not call. I went to work instead. I got through half a day before my HVAC guy told me to go home. He said I looked sick, that he could handle the crew for the rest of the day. I told him I hadn't been sleeping. That was true enough. When I got back to my apartment, I did not look across the street. I kept the blinds closed. I ordered food and didn't eat it. I sat on my bed with all the lights on and listened to the pipes in the walls. Around midnight, rain began tapping softly against the glass. At least I thought it was rain. The sound came from the bedroom window. Slow at first, then steady. A soft, damp ticking. I tried to ignore it. I told myself there was weather. I told myself the forecast had mentioned rain. I told myself not every sound belonged to the house across the street. Then I remembered. My bedroom window faces the street, but it is set beneath the overhang of the fire escape above. Rain almost never touches that glass. The tapping stopped. I sat very still. A pale fog began to spread across the outside of the window. Not the inside, the outside. Condensation bloomed slowly against the dark glass, widening in a soft oval as if someone were breathing inches from the pane. I did not move. I did not breathe. The fog faded, then returned, larger, closer. And through it, from the other side of the glass, a handprint slowly pressed into the condensation. If this one got under your skin, there are more waiting. Subscribe to the leather-bound grimoire